community doing a co-broadcast or simulcast with our Zulu radio station, Ukhozi FM. This will be fun, I tell you. What is important for us as the SABC today is we will be using this day to touch base with most, if not all, our stakeholders to remind them that radio is here to stay. Today is an opportunity for us as the radio practitioners to hear from all our stakeholders, especially the public, about the role of radio in public discourse. And yes, we will go down memory lane to honor the legends that have graced our airwaves and dedicated their lives to the mission of informing, educating, and entertaining the radio-loving listener. Without any further waste of time, ladies and gentlemen, allow me to hand over back to Thabiso, as he has a packed and an exciting program that I do not want to spoil. And with those short words, I once again welcome you to the SABC, and I wish all of you a very happy World Radio Day. Thank you.
So I don't want to waste further time. Maybe let me also introduce Dr. Brilliant just to give us a sense of today's occasion. Round of applause, please.
Thanks so much, colleagues. I'm on the clock. I think we're going live shortly, and Kathy's going to come and upend me, so let me just rush through this. Colleagues from the SABC, colleagues of the Wits Centre for Journalism, guests, friends, welcome, and thank you for joining us this morning. It's a really, really fantastic opportunity to be here at the SABC to observe and celebrate World Radio Days. I'm pleased, so pleased to be standing in front of you on what is really the heart of radio broadcasting in our multiple prize-winning country. Can we get an amen for that? So World Radio Day is not just a moment to pause and reflect on the medium of radio, but also on the power of audio, of live and recorded sound, and its ability to bring people together, to get them to be passionately moved, to recognize themselves through accents, catchphrases, and one of our 12 official languages through music and entertainment. In an election year, there is no doubt to all of us seated in this room that radio is a critical space for public engagement, for community development, and for information and storytelling. Digital radio shatters the boundaries of South Africa, reaching South Africans wherever they may find themselves, linking powerful allies for the culture of this country through its music, its stories, and its people. The Wits Centre for Journalism, through its Radio Academy, reaffirms its commitment to growing talent and improving the practice of radio journalism through its teaching, training, and eventing, such as this one today. Our Citizen Journalism Network project, with its model of working with community-based paralegals who contribute original content to community radio stations around this country, is just one of the ways in which we are leveraging our position in the industry to grow local media and content. We look forward to working with the SABC, Siphelele, on similar other projects in the future. Today we'll spend a little bit of time prevailing over this powerful medium and its growth, and I'm humbled that the Wits Centre for Journalism has been so warmly welcomed to Radio Park, hosted by the SABC. My thanks to the SABC team for making this possible and for the work you have put in together with my own colleagues for this event. My sincere thanks to each of you for making time to be with us this morning, and in particular to our panelists, one of which flew in from Durban to be with us, who will share with us their perspectives, ideas, and thoughts on the state of radio in South Africa. I wish you a joyous, happy World Radio Day, and thank you once again for joining us. I'm waiting on Kathy. As soon as she arrives, we will hand over to her. Thank you so much.
I just wanted to emphasize one simple point, Doc, that the condition of everybody being here, why you were invited here, it's just based on one condition. One, that when it's panel discussion time, you all raise your hands like smart kids in the class to ask questions, because it's supposed to be an interactive session. So I hope that you've got your questions ready so that it becomes worthwhile. So as Doc was saying, we are literally waiting for Kathy to come through so that we can start with our session. And then we will have another session as well after a comfort break. And as you might have gone through the program, quite important issues to deliberate on. So I'm not too sure what's happening on air as we speak, if news is still on or not. Yeah, is it a video or audio? Yeah, there's an audio sound which was put together by Alan Finlay. Let's go for it.
Good morning, everyone, and greetings from sunny Argentina. My name is Alan Finlay, and I edited this issue of State of the Newsroom. I'm sorry I could not be there with you. This State of the Newsroom focuses on radio, and we hope to add to the conversations that have been part of the country's centenary celebrations since the first radio broadcast. Many of the authors in this issue are veterans in different ways to radio in South Africa, and all are experts in their field, which makes their perspectives exceptionally rich and interesting to read. All three tiers of radio are dealt with: commercial, community, and public broadcasting. And if there's a central question provoked by the articles and commentaries, it is this: given that radio is such a critical medium for public participation, how can it continue to play a strong role in shaping and supporting South Africa's democracy? The articles show that besides radio being a hell of a lot of fun as a medium, it is ongoing and hard work to make sure it serves the public interest. There are many creative ways it can do this, but there are also many pitfalls. And it has to be said, there are myriad ways in which radio can be co-opted, both by those interested in simply profiting from it and those wanting to control it for their own political ends. The articles suggest that there is a need to pause, to take stock, to look back at where we have come from, and to learn from the possibilities and mistakes of the past in order to reinvigorate the potential that radio has to nourish our democracy at its grassroots. I would like to thank all the authors who made this issue possible for their time, as well as Dinesh Balia, the director of the Wits Centre for Journalism, and other colleagues at the centre, such as those in finance who were involved in the production in different ways, Kimberly Kirsten, a student who helped with some of the compilation, the Press Council, SANEF, as well as Erwin Manoyam for his fantastic layout. I hope you enjoy reading it and have some very fruitful discussions today. Thank you and goodbye.
Okay, I think we're just about ready. I think Kathy is here, and I'd really would like to take this opportunity to call through the panelists, maybe to take their positions. Advocate Robin Sowal, let's give him a round of applause, please. Director of Radio Cressy. Florence Kikine, SABC Head of Advertising and Media Strategy. Is Florence here? Oh, there she is. Yeah, and this session would look into the radio sector in terms of its public interest and how radio built democracy, because radio did play a massive role in terms of building democracy. So as I said, guys, as a reminder, we would also expect you to, with the limited time that we have, to also participate as well. And there she is, Kathy Mutlatlana. Let's also give her a round of applause.
Check 1, 2.
So I can notice them.
Hi. Hello. Testing 1, 2.
My name is Sebonga. I'm
Testing 1, 2.
voting for MK Party. My reasons, or my only reason, is because President Jacob Zuma is voting for MK Party, and then Sebonga is voting for MK Party. There's no manifesto, there's no nothing. We are following where President Jacob Zuma is leading. That's all. Thank you, ma'am.
I'll state good morning. It's personal here. You see, as for me, I will vote for Mkondo Sizwe because former President Jacob Zuma, during his term, was more in the rural areas of which other parties are not recognize us in the rural areas. And they don't even care actually, because you can see that they renew some of the road in the urban areas, but in the rural areas we don't have even that tire road. We don't have water, we've got nothing, but no one is care about it. But comes election, they come and promise us heaven and earth.
Good morning, Kathy. This is Luzuko from Cape Town. Kathy, I never even read about the manifesto as MK Party. But to know that former President Jacob Zuma was a very, very big fan of radical economic transformation, that's why at that time I was still supporting the ANC. Now, based on that, I think that's what the MK stand for. So that's why I'm keen to vote for them. Before they were announcing the party, I was not encouraged to vote for any party. I will vote for them based on that. This is Luzuko from Cape Town.
Kelly Takatawa in Cape Town, concerned South African citizen. 2,900 soldiers are sent to Eastern DRC to go and disarm the armed groups in that DRC, leaving the armed group in KZN, Cape Town, Limpopo and Gauteng, killing the South African citizen. Mr. Ramaphosa, I'm happy because it was only Thursday last week when you were tabling your SONA. You are not caring about South Africans, you're only caring about the business that you are obtaining in DRC. Thanks.
Good morning, Sis Kathy and your team, Jumbo Africa. Sis Kathy, I'm very, very worried about our government and our president. We have seriously, even those from DRC, they are not going to vote. Why can't you send those army here in province to province so that they can deal with the high crime that we experience? President Ramaphosa is failing us. I think we need early election. This guy doesn't have a plans for us. Councillor of KZN has been killed, but it's something normal. We are not safe in this country. It's peace in Matlosana.
SAFM 104 to 107 nationwide.
For years, Outsurance has been saying they'll save you money on your car insurance, or you can ask for 500 Rand or 1,500 Rand cash if they don't. Here's Fundi, 46 from Brackenfell.
I was not happy with what I was paying. I heard about the 500 Rand from Outsurance, but they give me lesser amount for my car. I'm paying 523 Rand on my 2013 Hyundai iX35.
So here's how it works. SMS out to 30754. We'll give you a no-obligation car insurance quote. If the quote is less than you're currently paying, you'll end up saving money on your car insurance every month. And if it's more than you're currently paying, you can ask for 500 Rand. And if you've been with the same insurer and claim-free for 3 years or more, tell us you want 1,500 Rand.
Give Outsurance a call. It's a win-win. You can't lose.
SMS out to 30754 now. That's out to 30754. Outsurance is a licensed insurer and FSP. T's, C's, and limits apply. Premiums are risk profile dependent and reviewed annually. Client comments do not constitute financial advice.
Burnley FC will play their hearts out to ensure that Arsenal walks away empty-handed from Turf Moor.
Fafana with the equaliser. What a run from Wilson Oliver.
Meanwhile, the Gunners of London have big plans to occupy the top spot.
Oh, it's in! And that seals it for Arsenal. We lead 3-1 and it's Trossard's goal.
This is the Premier League. Burnley FC battles it out with Arsenal FC on Saturday, 17 February at 4 p.m. Live on S3, also available on SABC Plus and SABCSport.com. Hashtag We Love It Here. Brought to you by SABC Sport.
For the love of the game.
The Talking Point with Kathy Motlatlana. Weekdays, 9 a.m. till midday.
You're tuned into the second hour of the Talking Point. I did promise today it is World Radio Day, so we'll sort of save all of the messages for what radio means to you for the final hour of the show at 11 o'clock. What we're doing now is having an important conversation. It is a special broadcast. I've changed locations. I'm no longer looking at myself in the studio. You know I love our studio because we've got the best views of the city in Johannesburg. But we've moved downstairs to the auditorium right at Radio Park, and we're going to be discussing the State of the Newsroom report. And this is really a collaboration that is taking place today between the Wits Journalism Centre and also SABC Radio. So to get us into this conversation, Advocate Robin Seelal is the director at Radiocracy. The name of the organization says a lot. One thinks democracy, radiocracy. What is the combination there?
Essentially, Kathy, firstly, good morning, nice to be here. Essentially, it comprises radio, democracy, and development.
Love it. Also joining us for this conversation is Florence Kikine, who's the head of advertising media strategy at the SABC. Florence, good morning.
Good morning, Kathy, and good morning to your listeners. Thank you for inviting me.
So you are the official that was threatened with all sorts of things if you didn't come into this seat today. I know it can often be a hot potato, and many of the officials that have been here before say, well, we're not radio people, Kathy. Don't get us to do this. So I'm glad that you're willing to take the hot seat for our conversation today.
We love radio.
Absolutely.
We are radio.
Absolutely. So, Robin, there's no denying the fact that we've seen such incredible changes to newsrooms. It's not a South African experience, it's a global experience. And many newsrooms are having to contend with what is their future. And the conversation, it touches not only on issues of sustainability, but I think also about relevance and audiences. We're dealing with audiences that need different things today than perhaps what they did 5 years ago. And newsrooms are having to continuously adapt. What are you wanting to achieve with this report? You've spent quite a number of years putting this data together. So what really can people expect out of it?
Thank you for that question, Kathy. Essentially, I would say it's about awareness. It's about awareness not necessarily just from the audience perspective, or should I say the listener's perspective, but it's also the broadcaster. Whether they in commercial, community, or the public service broadcaster, as in the SABC. But it's also about advertisers. It's about sponsors. And it's about would-be sponsors and would-be advertisers. So it's an awareness issue. You are right about radio contending with a plethora of competing interests. Mm-hmm. And that competing interests, it varies. And maybe later on we can talk about the impact, if any, by artificial intelligence. Yeah. But we can talk about that down the line. But just to answer your question directly, I think it's more about ensuring that the public interest is best served. And it's about research, research, research.
Mm. Florence, we're also talking about what is 100 years of radio in South Africa. In many ways, it is a significant milestone, and we will know stories politically of how important radio was. I was always fascinated by the idea that somebody like former President Thabo Mbeki used to be the radio announcer, you know, for Radio Freedom, and what that, what a medium like that did. So there's so many different ways in which we can use radio in society. For you, 100 years anniversary, what does that mean?
I think for us as the SABC, but myself as well, is that radio, the evolution of radio has been the most great to actually view. Radio has sustained a lot of competition over the years from various different entities in terms of the different mediums that have been introduced into the world of media, and radio has stayed very relevant. And in the past 100 years of radio, and looking into South Africa, for example, you will note that radio as a medium has always been a tool to be used depending on who is using that particular tool. And it had in the past served different interests. And what the dawn of democracy has done is to level the play field and to introduce accountability of broadcasters and presenters, yourselves, for example, in terms of asking the right questions but having a balanced view in the process. So when we look at radio, and I mean, I was looking at the booklet that has been put together, it is such a wonderful tool to go back in time to see how radio has evolved and the different aspects of radio that have actually emerged over a period of time, from it being a tool for society to use to communicate, to get messaging across the globe and across within South Africa in different parts and all of that, and to it being a tool for government. I mean, it has always been a tool for government. However, how that has evolved over time is actually quite fascinating and very interesting. It has always been a tool for advertisers to reach particular audiences and to sell products and to influence. And I mean, radio is the original social media, if you can put it that way. And it has always been the one platform where it was a two-way a stream, where the broadcaster will say something and the listeners will be given the opportunity to interact, which then, like I said, the original social media. But even with the advent of the internet and the growth that has happened with internet and also other new radio that has been introduced through the internet, we've seen radio actually stand its ground, grow instead of declining. And the challenge for radio, though, has always been, how do you measure? I mean, I think it's the same thing across all different medium, is the measurement thereof. There has been a lot of changes in the measurement of radio, which is very good, because as new things come through, so should be changes in terms of how do you measure those audiences, how do you measure the effectiveness, how do you measure the fairness and the balance of radio over a period of time.
All right.
Yeah.
Robin, I want us to deal with the issue of numbers and audiences, because in as much as radio can always brag about having the biggest numbers, we bring in millions of listeners incomparable to what TV does. In fact, there's just no comparing the kind of reach. It doesn't mean that radio has been exempt from the losses. Yes, there have been increases, but there have also been significant losses in listenership due to a number of various factors. So let's talk about then where radio finds itself today, competing against all of these different mediums, yes, maintaining numbers, but also being aware of the fact that there is something that is eating up its margins.
It's about quality in, quality out. And I have a saying that take care of the quality, the quantity will take care of itself. And as I said a little earlier on, it's about that awareness that I talk about of what is the role of radio. We talk about being a magical medium, and we talk about it being a charming medium, and the wireless, so to speak.
You get to have fun.
Yes,
so much fun.
Absolutely. But my sense is that we need to pay more attention to the content that's going out. All of us know content is king. We've heard that many times over. But do we actually put that into practice? I heard earlier on this morning somebody very senior here at the SABC, the general manager, may I add, talking about the DJs. And I may sound old-fashioned when I call them presenters as opposed to DJs. And he says that the DJs must back announce the WITS publication. And I said to Dinesh, quietly, we should be front announcing that. Okay, but it's those little things that we need to pay attention to, and you know, again, it's about research. It's about making sure that you are catering to the needs of the listener. And dare I say it, it's very, very important to get people who are not only passionate about radio, in the radio business, but who have that intellectual curiosity. And radio is not a means to an end. You need people who have the love for it, the compassion, who care, who are concerned about South Africa as a developing nation. And I think that's absolutely critical, because you know, radio reaches where no other medium reaches. We heard earlier as well, no less than 23 million listened to radio over the week. That's a huge number of people. But are we really using the power of the microphone to influence them in a positive way, but more importantly, to actually improve their livelihood and their lifestyles?
Robin, it's easy to talk about content is king and put resources into content. But the reality is that even newsrooms are trying to figure out what is the content that is relevant for society today. That's part of why we have the conversation, because we understand that the society that we're living in has evolved, it has changed. You go onto social media, you'll be surprised at the conversations that people are having. You'll be surprised at the things that are trending. You're like, really? 5 million people commenting and speaking about this one thing? And that then suggests maybe people are more interested in X over Y. Maybe not X literally, because it's changed its name. But for the purpose of the conversation, you understand. So this idea of content and what is content that matters, can we talk about it from a homogeneous perspective, as if there's a room you walk into and there are all of these ideas and that's the content that matters, and anything outside that room is less than content? Actually, you shouldn't be touching that stuff.
The ideas in the room that you're talking about are triggers. They are the source of where we should go. I said research earlier on, but it's also about training. It's about training people who come in through the door, come into your radio station, into your studio, but it's also about refresher training. Things are changing on a daily basis. I'll say probably on an hourly basis as well. And that's very, very important. Just to kind of comment on what Florence said, I wish we can get the youth to understand and appreciate and realize that radio was the first social media platform. and so we can get more youth listening to radio, so to speak. I think that's very, very important to understand. And yeah, I mean, it's about training, it's about resources, but it's about thinking ahead. What do you really want to deliver? What is important? Not the flavor of the month stuff. You know, I detest the fact that I listen to various radio stations around the country and I'm hearing the same thing as the headline news item.
Yes.
And that's something that you wonder whether, you know, you got the good quality people and are they trained properly? And I think that's important to keep in mind.
Florence, what Robin is raising is such an important issue, because part of it could well speak to sort of the changes in our society, where of course people are now a lot more vocal about issues around current affairs, or feel that they have the right to speak about those issues than ever before, especially in a country like South Africa, where people are very interested in what is happening, including the news cycle. How do you, as a broadcast channel, then make the decisions between, do we go with what is the perceived flavor of the month, or do we build something more substantial that you can get audiences to love and appreciate over time? Because in as much as it doesn't sound like they're trade-offs, we know that in reality, there are trade-offs to what Robin is saying.
It's a very, the issue of content and the approach thereof to it is a very tough one to deal with, especially when you've got competing interests. The one thing that I will appreciate with country South Africa is the fact that it is the one country where anybody and everybody can say whatever they is on their mind without worrying about being arrested or anything. For us, that's a very big tick, especially for the medium of radio, because that's where we talk. And second of all, I think as SABC, we've had many instances where we either had to go with what is popular or go with what it was not popular at the time. And we had many instances where we've had backlash from the same public to say, why are you talking about this when everybody else is talking about this? And obviously, with us having 19 radio stations, so it would have been a different approach at different times with the different radio stations. But one of the key things from a content development perspective that we always need to bear in mind, be it us as a broadcaster or as a country overall, is that we've reached an era where there's more autonomy on the listener to actually influence what we as broadcasters talk about. And as you say, I mean, things could be on social media, a particular topic that people are interested in. But what we need to be careful of, especially as broadcasters, and we're saying we can get sources of information from anywhere, is taking a topic that only a select part of the community is interested in and then superimpose it to the rest of the country. So that is actually one of the key things that we continuously have to battle with as a broadcaster.
All right, I see Robin is sitting upright. He might have something to add to that, but I'm going to give you a moment. I'll give you a moment after we take the latest news headlines. I will also give those that are in the audience an opportunity to reflect on this conversation. And we'll also have to touch on things like your community radio, your online radio. Mm-hmm. Does podcasting count as radio? I wonder. What is the difference really? I'm getting into contractual matters. I can see Tony, the station manager at SFM is nodding his head. He's like, absolutely not. We'll continue the conversation in a moment. It's time for your 10:30 news headlines.
Kathy, and with the news headlines, good morning. The ANC Youth League says the party's final bid to appeal the ruling ordering it to hand over its cadre deployment records to the DA was never about hiding anything. The Roads Freight Association has warned that the decision to increase toll fees is likely to lead to an increase in retail prices, and former Proteas player and coach Mike Proctor is still in the intensive care unit in a Durban hospital. And those are your headlines. A full news update at 11.
Taking a look at your markets this morning, the rand currently trading at 18 rand 85 to the dollar, 23 rand 84 to the pound, and 20 rand 30 to the euro. Markets in Asia closed higher. The JSE is firmer in mid-morning trade. Markets in Europe are also slightly up this hour. Gold is trading at $2,024. Platinum, $892 per ounce. The price of Brent crude oil is at $82.25 a barrel.
The Talking Point with Kathy Motlatlana. Weekdays, 9 a.m. till midday.
We continue the conversation on the Talking Point in a moment. I'll also give you, as our listener, the opportunity to contribute to this conversation. We're talking about the state of the newsroom, but also as we mark World Radio Day, the significance of radio, and I guess the relationship really that exists between newsrooms and radio, because even though those are two separate entities, the issue of content that Robin was talking about stems from newsrooms, and that's where that link comes up. I'll take your calls on 086 000 2032. That's the number to dial, and of course you can also send through those WhatsApp voice notes and text messages on 0614 104 107. Our guest for this conversation, Advocate Robin Silwell, who is the Director of Radiocracy, and Florence Kikine, who is the Head of Advertising Media Strategy at the South African Broadcasting Corporation. So, Robin, I'm going to give you a chance just to speak to the issue of balancing competing interests within different media houses really and broadcasters, and where then this content comes in. Because the minute she said you can't take content that only a small group is interested in and superimpose it on a big group, I saw you begin to sit upright and say, well, actually, I may not completely agree with that.
I'm not saying I disagree, but I suppose Florence represents the public service broadcaster. And as she well knows, that the public service broadcaster is to serve various people in the community, various groupings. And so a particular issue could be of interest to a group, a small group, mind you, but it's important to have it broadcast. It's important to have it covered because it could be of interest to the other listeners, the other grouping, so to speak. I say sometimes that the listener does not know what he likes or she likes, but he or she likes what they know, right? Or will get to know. So I think it's important because it's also part of education, talking about today's World Radio Day theme. It's about education, it's about informing them in an entertaining way. So I think it's important that as the SABC, and I'm also bringing community radio here as well, they should be covering the various issues, rhino poaching, various issues. I talked earlier about the youth, gender-based violence, the whole issue of climate change. We're tipping the iceberg, but we're living through climate change as we speak. But are the radio stations, are the newsrooms doing enough to focus on that particular area so that the listener, South African society, gets informed so that they could actually take some positive action in a proactive way?
Let's talk about the issue of community radio and the underdevelopment that we're seeing in that space. Of course, we have some community radio stations that really do a great work, but often they're relegated to almost staying within a particular place financially, and that, of course, stymies any potential growth for future.
Kathy, you raised, so to speak, a hornet's nest. There's major challenge with community radio. And I agree with you. There are some great community radio stations around the country in the different provinces. But it's issues about resources. It's issues about corporate governance. It's about training. And in some instances, it's about a particular municipality having more than just one or two community radio stations. So sustainability becomes an important factor. How do the small businessman supports 3 or 4 different community radio stations in that particular area? It's something I would like to suggest that the regulator looks at very, very carefully and think about this as they move forward. But community radio is here to stay. May I add that community radio is the most transformed sector in the country. And when I say the most transformed sector, I'm also including the print media industry. And community radio stations go where no other station really goes. And I'm not necessarily talking about the public service broadcaster. I'm talking about the people and the issues on the ground. Programs driven by the people and profits putting back into the community. So it's about people at the end of the day. And as a good friend of mine, Bill Streaming, states, it's a clinic on air. And I'd like to add, the issues that you can cover on air, or should I say, cannot cover fully on air, you can cover off air and vice versa. You can't cover off air, you can cover on air. So community radio plays a real role in bringing people together and sorting out issues of public interest.
Florence, we can't have a conversation about radio, public broadcasting at the SABC and not talk about the SABC, because there's a whole chapter, thanks William Bird, on the SABC in this particular report. And a part of what it seeks to do, of course, is to try and track what has really happened on SABC radio over this 3-decade period that we have been in. And there have been some really positive steps that I think are worth noting. But I also just want to then focus here, for the purposes of this conversation, the challenges that have been highlighted in the report, and the view that an official like yourself, who's part of the SABC, how do you take what has been said in the report about where SABC has gone wrong with radio?
Radio and the public broadcaster in particular has had its own fair share of challenges across the country, and just like most medium have. From a radio perspective, I mean, the 3 decades of, is it 3 decades? No?
Yes,
yeah, the
3
3 decades of democracy. We've actually seen stations that initially were actually built in the pre-democracy time as a means to an end by the previous regime. And we've seen those stations transform to be parts of the communities that they service, and to actually be beacons of hope for many people, and also being accessible to the various different communities, no matter how small a community where you come from. And yes, from internally, from an SABC perspective, we've seen quite a few challenges as far as radio is concerned. From in terms of having to deliver the public mandate and finance the public mandate, and which is something that some people don't seem to understand, that public mandate, as much as we want to enforce it and we believe in it, and it's something that is of importance, but it also needs to be funded. But at the same time, on the same vein, as far as a public mandate is concerned, we've seen a lot of our programs and certain entities within the same public mandate side in terms of education. If you look at dramas across their various different platforms, how well they are doing in servicing that community that they need to service, and also the big numbers that they draw, which is a positive. Though we have to fund those ourselves, and we do not have that part of the funding. Other challenges, though, is the language issue, to say how then do we preserve the language? What is it that we are doing as a public broadcaster to build the various different languages? Because obviously we have the responsibility to ensure that Ukhozi broadcast in pure Zulu, and so on and so on. And those are big challenges, because we live in a society that has glorified not being an African, to be a pure African, to speak your own language, where we have glorified going into schools whose medium of instruction or whose core is English. We've glorified all of that, and that has had a ripple effect in terms of the feeder as far as a language is concerned. So we are doing quite a lot of things our association with the Bendoreng, for example, and various other language or cultural groups are actually purely to build that item.
So,
yeah.
So those issues notwithstanding, William is saying that he wants to hear more prepackaged content on radio. He wants to listen to a piece and have natural sound, and know that there was an effort made. You went to the streets, you interviewed people, you came back, you edited it, and you just wanted it to sound nicely when somebody switches on their radio. And he's saying right now, all he hears when he switches on is Kathy yapping, 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 and quite frankly, he's done with it. So how do you take him out of his misery?
We take him out of his misery. Listen, there's a lot of work that is done in the background that may not necessarily be coming to the fore, and part of it is, if this was my private business, I would create a space where we can actually have more and more commentary and stuff coming from the public into our various different platforms. But we do that in different ways, where we allow the organic conversations that are happening in the streets to be actually permutate and on radio. Perhaps as a broadcaster, we need to do more of that. We also need to give more impetus into the packaging thereof of such. And I think it is the packaging that will actually take him out of his misery even quicker.
All right, Robin, do you have anything to add before I move over to the audience to hear some of their contributions to this conversation? And if you have comments, of course, try keep those as short as possible. If it's questions, let me know who exactly you're directing your question to. Robin?
I haven't read William Byrd's chapter, but I think he makes an important point. He's talking about authenticity, but it's also about relevance. And to a certain extent, is probably alluding to a model of a bottom-up approach, you know. And I'm not necessarily alluding to the fact that the SABC is top-down. I would venture to suggest that it should be a hybrid of that kind of approach, both a top-down approach. When I say top-down, guidance and direction from, you know, the journalist to whoever's involved in that production of that program, but also giving the public an opportunity, giving them a voice, because at the end of the day, the public service broadcaster, dare I say it, belongs to the public. Give them that voice and let them speak. It's about freedom of expression. It's a two-way communication.
All right. Thanks for those contributions, Robin. So we've got a microphone that is roving within our audience. I'm going to ask you perhaps if you can raise your hand for questions, comments to this particular session. We'll also see if we can put some calls on the line. Remember, you can get in touch with us on 086 000 2032. What do you think is the current state of radio? What is the state of the newsroom, as it were, and how you believe that ultimately is contributing to what? Declining levels of quality. So I guess, you know, we're doing a good job, but you guys are like, no, actually you're not there yet. Your quality is bad. You need more training. You need more resources. In fact, I don't even know why I still listen to you anyway, but I'm still here because I love radio. Yes, ma'am. If you can please just introduce yourself, the organization you represent, and your question or comment.
Okay. My name is Lerato. I'm the acting coordinator for the WITS Radio Network at the WITS Center for Journalism. I think I would like to contribute to the resources aspect. I think we've all discussed, and I think we're sitting in a congregation of the converted where we know that newsrooms are under-resourced. We know that there's a huge juniorization of newsrooms, and having worked on the back end of newsrooms, there's an inequality that sort of like producers and anchors feel when it comes to resources, when it comes to remuneration and support, but also when it comes to training. So, I mean, that is public broadcaster, commercial radio, and all of those aspects. But also when it comes to community radio, we work on projects like the Citizen Justice Network project that works with community radios, but also besides a sitting like this that we should actually have what we call imbizos, or sittings with the public to say what is their community radio station doing. We do it with local legal advice officers, and we ask them to bring the stakeholders that are in the community to tell us what the problems are and how we can assist with working with paralegals to say how can they get access to their democracy, which is getting access to service. So I think the support of organizations like the SABC, besides the donor funding environment, is significant for us to not sit and meet and have discussions, but not do the ground on the work, not do the work on the ground.
All
I
right.
think that's quite important.
All right. Thanks for that, Lerato. Of course, radio still has to be fit for purpose, right? Because you still have to retain the audiences that you have, and furthermore, to grow them. So I'm seeing at the back a lot of young people. I want to know, particularly from the young people, what makes radio exciting for you? Because we could be talking about, you know, William wants more net sound, but maybe you don't want net sound. Maybe that's not what interests you.
My name is Gwena Siema. I am the content producer at UFM and Voice of Vets. So what makes radio exciting, I think, from the point of, packages, I think there are more in terms of more research that was done that makes it even more exciting to show that you have invested your time in doing that particular package, and also to show that you have understood what you are talking about. So also on the point of also, as the upcoming elections are coming, what I would love to see more female experts coming on board, more women to be given a chance to talk about, socioeconomic issues, because I feel like most of the issues are just swept under the carpet and not being given or not being addressed as much as possible. But also, I would love to see the SABC actually having more experts that are female. So also to be given a voice, to also voice in terms of a place where women issues are far as concerned. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that point. And the issue of gender is a huge one. I think more broadly, when we talk about who's represented, even before we get to elections, who is represented within the radio space. And if we're talking here, talk radio, we know the numbers, right? The majority of that is hugely slanted towards males, and there are a number of reasons for that. So that's a very important point that you're raising there. Anybody else that wants to add? Okay, I'm going to take the gentleman in the back and we'll bring it here to the front to Tony. Yes, sir.
All right. I'm Libzulaka Gimzoki Khatebe. I'm from Nemisa. I'm doing a radio broadcast. So I bunked a class to be here.
I can hear that you've got a voice for radio.
Thank you. So for me, I was also going to ask the question you asked on what's interesting about radio. Every lecture we get in class always ask us, what are we listening to? And nobody's listening to SABC. I'm so sorry. Because I guess we are radio broadcasters who want to be producers also. So when we talk about the content that's been produced, we feel like it's not pertaining to us. You know what I mean? And they say we, especially talk radio, but we listen to podcasts. I want you to understand the difference. You talk, they talk, but we listen to podcasts. So for me, I feel like the SABC is not listening to us or looking at us. Last year, I think we came here 12 times, where we had youth initiatives, and we just wanted the SABC to be part of it. You know what I mean? And we were just turned down from the reception. Public wants to be for them. I feel like we could actually be far off now.
So in terms of podcasting, right, because you make an important point.
Yes.
They talk, we talk. So what is it about podcasting that you find particularly appealing?
The things that media doesn't want you to talk about.
Okay.
For an example, what are the challenges that you went through after varsity before getting a job at SABC or whatever? We don't talk about those things. We think after varsity, just come to Joburg and you get a job. After you study at Wits, you just get a job because you are from Wits. But that's not the reality. The reality is what they talk about on the podcast, and that's what we want to hear from our public broadcasters.
It's more relatable. It's more personal. All right.
Thank you.
Very important point there. Yes. Tony, you heard there. Podcasting. The podcasts are speaking the language of the people.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Tony Soglo. I'm the business manager for the Fortune Combo, and SAFM is one of the stations in that combo. Interestingly enough, we're currently conducting qualitative research for SAFM. And for the past 2 weeks, I've been sitting in focus groups around the country, just hearing thoughts of our audiences. And to your point, Kathy, two things. One, content is key. And in content being key, that is also quite diverse. In a state that just yesterday we were in one focus group, and the group was quite divided because there was a conversation around how one group preferred local content. The other group said local content is too depressing, so they prefer international content. Now that brings a bit of an issue to the newsroom from our perspective in terms of balancing the content. And you spoke to the issue of balancing content, which is very, very important for us as radio. And I think that's something that we strive to achieve. Whether we get there or not, I think it's a conversation to have another day. But striving to achieve the balance in content is very, very key. And in talking about the content, I just want to quote something from William, talking about the page 53 of the report. Find it very interesting, by the way. I must say congrats to Doc. I think you guys have done a fantastic job in putting together this book. Just to sort of challenge one or two things, just briefly. We've seen, for example, a dramatic reduction in news and current affairs program in favor of talk radio. Specifically, we're talking about SAFM. Current affairs have been reduced significantly in programs placed in slots that have no audiences between 5 and 6. SAFM, the only English medium national broadcasting service station, has only 2 hours of current affairs a day, 5 to 6 and 12 to 1. My sort of challenge there is, if you listen to yourself in the morning or you listen to Stephen in the breakfast, they're talking about current content, and that's current affairs. So we need to be able, and I see Angie's sort of not saying no, and I understand where that is coming from, I understand, because we then have to sit down and sort of redefine what current affairs is. Current affairs is content that is current in just normal speaking. So that becomes a conversation where we have on a daily, your open hour, the first hour, I could cover that as current affairs. Why? Because it's people talk about what is happening in their specific areas. And so that is something that I think we together, combined, have to sort of sit down, redefine from the academia to us in the industry, and find a way to forge a space for our audiences. But at the end of the day, it comes back to the content. Mm-hmm. The content, which is why I started off talking about the research. The content is key for our audiences. Thanks.
Thank you so much for that contribution, Tony. And I wonder, I'll come to you in a moment, Dinesh, but should the idea, when we look at the future and the sustainability of radio, because there is a nostalgia about it, right? That because radio means so much, we all know what it was like listening to our favorite broadcasters. I know in my mind, I just want to be like... And that's still there, based on who I was listening to and who was really influencing my thinking at a particular point in time. And this nostalgia that we each carry and a very personal feeling of radio, should we be aspiring to move back to? Should we say radio needs to go back to? Or is the conversation really about saying, what does radio need to be in order for it to be fit for purpose for the future? Because it's one thing to point to what it used to be and the greatness. I don't want to make it a make radio great again type conversation. But what do we take from the traditional greatness of radio and what the young people are saying to then making it a medium that can still survive the next 100 years? Do you understand what I'm saying, Robin?
Thanks, Kathy, for that. I would say that it's a combination of what you're talking about. Radio has been great, and I know exactly what you're talking about. You may be aware that I'm finishing up a book at the moment to celebrate 100 years of radio. And I've got content from about 100 listeners, not about 100 listeners from around the country. It's just amazing how many people talk about the past. And it's not just about nostalgia and emotion and, the good old days. But they, in between the lines, I read that they're looking for good quality content, even if it's just music. And I also learned a lot about people loving South African music. I know radio stations around the country, not just the public service broadcaster. So, ICASA, 90% and 80% and 35%, et cetera, et cetera. But it's amazing how many people like South African music. Who thought somebody from South Africa, from this very city, will go and win a Grammy Award? For that matter. Yeah. So it's about that from the past, and it's about your focus group meetings. How can we find a nice little mix, a blend? But again, it's about finding out what the listener wants to listen to.
All right.
But it's also not just the listener. It's if you in broadcasting, if you in journalism, if you in the newsroom, you should have that gut feeling as well. I think that's very, very important. Just to say to you, Tony, and you asked the question early on about podcasting, as somebody once said, radio is the book. Podcasting is the chapters in the book. There's a complementary relationship between both.
Yeah.
So let's don't think they're in competition. I think that's important to understand.
Dinesh, you've got the mic in your hand.
Gosh, I have so many comments to make.
It's a good thing it's almost time for news.
There we go. So let me just say that the William we're talking about is William Bird of the Media Monitoring Agency. So thank you so much, William, for being here. We don't mean to pick on you, but thank you for your contributions. Let me just say a couple of things. One of them is that when we talk about the future of radio, we can't be talking about one model. When we talk about listeners, we can't be talking about a single person. And I think we are still, as practitioners, lynched or kind of hooked to the single narrative, as it were, and those individuals. A person who's working or is a captain of industry, running a huge international agency is a father. It is a person who plays golf on the weekends. It is a person who has a daughter who listens to Taylor Swift. Taylor Swift is a massive industry in herself who has enormous impact. So that person is multidimensional. So the content we produce can't speak one story in essence. And that's what we really have to be thinking about. And I think when young people say that they're disillusioned and they don't feel that they're being accessed, it means that the stories that we're telling don't speak to them. It's not that the story is not important. So climate change journalism, for example, has taught us a huge lesson in that when we tell people only the doom and gloom, they switch off. And they're using their right to switch off immediately. What we're not doing is making it relevant to their lives on a daily basis. That mom who's packing a lunchbox needs to understand how climate change is going to impact the food that her child is eating. The second point for me, and the last one that I'll make, is that we actually need to think about that fine balance between what's in the public interest and what the public is interested in. And that's where we get lazy, right? Again, I'm going to go back to that mom who's packing that lunch. Her child is going to say that they're interested in pizza and sweets. She knows that actually her child should be eating those vegetables. There's no parent in this room who's going to tell me, actually, no, I'm good with pizza and sweets every single day. It's that fine balance that has put into thinking about how to get the veggies down with the pizza and sweets that makes her a success in raising her child. So there's a little bit of a fine balance and creativity that comes into how we package, what we're packaging, and making sure that people actually get what they need plus what they're interested in. And I'll leave it there. Thank you.
And I'm sure Dinesh has a masterclass on how to speak in sound, but that's not part of today's conversation. Before I have to wrap this conversation up for our on-air audience, and let me thank you, Robin and Florence, for your contribution, and also to the audience for your participation. We're going to go over to the news desk, and then we'll continue then with the final hour of the show after news.
Independent and impartial. This is SAFM News.
I want last chance
Thanks, Kathy.
to have
The
your
top stories
say.
this hour. ANC youth speak on the cater
I
deployment
think
court
you
meeting
you don't want to
and
go for
government
it?
joins
Before I
world
say
leader
goodbye, I've got 6 minutes. You can go ahead.
Okay. Radio as a medium will always be important in various communities and various societies. And as a public broadcaster, we will endeavor to ensure that the level made in educating, informing, and entertaining people, whilst empowering them to think at the back, in empowerment of people. And that, as other speakers have spoken, is not a dimensional approach. It's a multi-dimensional approach, and all these different new things that are coming in for the likes of podcast and streaming and all of that are actually elevating the medium of radio to different levels. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you so much. Robin?
Lerato raises a range of important points, but I just want to make a strong suggestion, if I may put it that way. We talk about sustainability, but where is that model going to come from? Yeah. It's about sustainability, it's about innovation, it's about viability as well. So the CP would put this on, but it's easy to be well resourced. Okay, we talk about community radio and we talk about etc. But it's not just the SABC community radio. It's the agency. How does it fulfill its mandate, its proper mandate, with not funds? Let's put it that way. there's so many other issues. And later, at the end of the day, they are kind of crazy, so to speak. But the people that ought to be funding these kind of things rely on the media as a platform to get the messaging out. You know, and I'm not necessarily talking politics here. It could be sports, it could be arts, it could be whatever. And I think that's very, very important. I like the point about gender. It's great to see, I'm a sports follower, it's great to see so many women on commentary and on the field, etc., and they're possibly overtaking the experts at SABC. Then to your point about the youth, you're right, you are going to switch off. If it doesn't connect with you, switch off. You know, and I often used to say, when somebody switches off, for them to switch back to SAFM or to Ukhozi FM, etc., it's almost impossible. You know? And I think that's something that SABC should think about. It's a resource issue again, but I think it's important. SABC needs to take it seriously because I think the SABC could be a wonderful role for the youth in our country.
Wow. Robin, Florence, thank you so much for being part of the conversation. Thank you to all of you as well for your contributions. I think the reality is that, you know, there are some tough conversations that we need to be having with ourselves. And sometimes it's not only about the fact that the numbers are there, but we need to be interrogating whether we can be doing more to give more substantive content to those numbers. But those are debates that we'll leave to Tony and I and the rest of the team here at the SABC. It's been a pleasure facilitating just this hour for you. I'm going to I'm going to hand over now to my colleague who's been running the program. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathy.
Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. I think it's appropriate for us to get a bit of a break, and then we'll come back.
Thank you very much. Thanks.
All right.
Check 1, 2. I'm not, no.
One, two. 1, 2, 1, 2.
Yes, I recognize
1,
her face.
1.
She's well, thank you. She was hoping to make it, but we were doing our own World Radio Day.
Yeah, we did I did that webinar for you guys.
Last year, yes, yeah, I understand
And
that.
so there's so many other issues that cropped up.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, we must sit and have a chat. Yeah. Oh, it's a busy day. very busy day.
Yeah. You know what I think, though? With regards to the SABC, I think it's become too big for its own good.
I think there's certain aspects that need to be addressed and carefully. I mean, there was a proposal on the SABC bill of setting up a separate board for commercial, but I think that's just going to cause chaos, having two separate boards.
Do you need Radio 2000? You know what I mean?
It's a good way for the public broadcaster to make money. It would be. To sell off, which is how they made money previously when they sold off.
The other one disadvantage is the other one. So I'll buy an advert cheaper at 2,000 compared to Metro.
Yeah. So it does allow them an opportunity, and I mean the stations do compete quite effectively with each other, which is nice to see. And I mean the importance of a public broadcaster can't be understated.
It's true, particularly for PBS.
Yeah.
But I just think they could trim up the fact again because it wouldn't be the first time. Remember your Hackard licenses.
Hackard license, Jacaranda license, all of those were SABC original. And it did make sense.
I think they're spending a lot of money on it because they run their own production. Their workforce.
Yeah, it's a huge workforce. But it's good. It's job creation. It's, it's that whole catch-22. You want to create jobs, you want to teach skills, you want to empower people.
They could do a lot of encouraging gig economy with companies. They put the radio show. Community radio stations.
And you're good to go. Stuart, we good?
Just making sure. I'm going to come sit here.
Yeah.
Okay, I think we're ready now. Are people outside in?
No.
Okay. Once again, good morning, good people. So this is the second session. I mean, this is very important, the era of broadcasting complaints and new online code of conduct. Julia Shem-Guild is head of legal regulations affair at the National Association of Broadcasters. Let's give her a round of applause, please.
Good morning, everyone.
So, I mean, this is very important subject because, I mean, as a practitioner, when you talk about complaints, I find that one, there is some kind of a misunderstanding on the part of listeners between what constitutes a complaint and preferences.
Yeah, 100%.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So somebody will call in thinking that they are complaining, but when you think about it, they are not complaining, they are simply saying, you are not tapping into the territory of my preference.
Perfect, yeah. I think that's a very interesting example. The BCCSA has been around for 30 years. It was established by the NAB 30 years ago, and I'll go into the history of that in a bit. But I think in relation to your particular complaint, I think there needs to be a very fine line between what constitutes a preference, and I think a lot of people have preferences, and what constitutes a complaint. And I think it all goes back to a need to make sure that there isn't censorship. I think if we look at our history, this country had a huge issue with censorship and people being told what to put on radio and how to put it on radio.
Yeah.
So I think that's the first thing. The BCCSA and the broadcasting sector as a whole is very, very mindful of avoiding censorship and avoiding talking about topics. In terms of actual complaints, there's obviously very specific things that the BCCSA deals with and that broadcasters need to be very careful of in terms of what is put on air. So, for instance, hate speech, sexual conduct, anything defaming people, anything that goes against the principles of the Constitution.
Yeah.
Not having someone on the air to provide an opinion, while it can be problematic if you haven't allowed someone a right of reply, it isn't necessarily an infringement of the BCCSA code.
Yeah, a bit fluid as well, because truth. We all have our own truth, right? Accuracy. We all have our own understanding of what constitutes accuracy. Fairness. Is even more broader, because what constitutes fairness? From a point of view of adhering to regulatory standards, are broadcasters themselves orientated around such issues?
I think for the most part they should be. All the broadcasters who are, let me go back. I think let's set the scene.
Yeah.
Broadcasters in South Africa, regulated broadcasters, have to have an ICASA license. You apply for your license in order to get Spectrum, and when you have Spectrum, you are allowed to broadcast on a station, a television station, or whatever. In terms of your license, you have to adhere to a broadcasting sector code. You can become a member of the National Association of Broadcasters, the NAB, and through your membership with the NAB, you have access to the BCCSA, the Broadcasting Complaints Commission of South Africa.
Yeah.
What that allows you to do is to have your complaints against your broadcasting organization heard by the BCCSA rather than the ICASA's CCC. Obviously, there's certain advantages there. It's quicker, it's much more efficient. And just with that as a background, people who are members of the NAB, who are also members of the BCCSA, they are signatories to the BCCSA's 3 codes of conduct, and we'll get into the third one now because I'm quite excited about that, are very much aware of what is required in terms of them, in terms of both their ICASA license, the Broadcaster Sector Code, and the BCCSA's 3 codes. So in theory, a licensed broadcaster in South Africa should be aware of what is expected of them.
Mm-hmm.
That being said, it's very difficult for the NAB to monitor its members, and it's very difficult for ICASA and the BCCSA to ensure that everyone is taking the steps that they absolutely have to train the journalists in their newsrooms, to train the presenters in their studios. And I think that's something that individual organizations need to focus quite a bit of energy on. It saves a lot of time, a lot of effort by avoiding potential complaints.
Yeah.
When they can be avoided.
Yeah. And I'm glad, training institutions like WITS are here as well, just to gauge, the sense of training with regards to, even also making listeners aware of, how to complain and what basis do you complain. Because, I can give you a lived experience. At some point, I was on my radio show talking about, I think it was around immigration, right? And somebody then complained to the BCCSA, but the BCCSA, to my luck, because I was not aware until that day, said, no, you can only complain if that which you complain about is about you directly as a person.
Yeah.
But if it's a broader issue, you cannot. We don't handle such complaints type of a situation.
Yeah.
So even as a broadcaster, I thought, I'm in trouble here. Until after the BCCSA said, actually not, because this does not fit into our mandate in terms of dealing with a complaint like that.
Yeah, 100%. The BCCSA, you have to bring a complaint when your own dignity has been infringed. You cannot complain on behalf of a third party. There was an example a few months ago where a sports star, someone made a joke about him because of something that had happened, and one of the listeners, laid a complaint with the BCCSA in respect of that sports star. Because the sports star himself did not lay the complaint, the BCCSA couldn't hear that complaint. There are other organizations, other entities, the Human Rights Commission, that can deal with those sort of complaints.
Yeah.
But the BCCSA scope is very, very limited in some senses to make sure that the complaints that are being dealt with relate to broadcasting specifically and relate to infringements of an individual person's dignity.
Yeah, guys, if you want to tap in as well, please just raise your hand. And just before we go to our audience as well, I also want to tap into the punitive measures as
Sure.
well, because in this we talk about accountability and how it works, generally speaking. So in most cases, it's an apology, and in my personal experience, because I've been to the BCCSA a couple of times. So in my experience, you go to some NGO, and you like a reformed prison. You go and offer your services to help that NGO, but I'm not too sure, whether that goes far enough in terms of trying to deal with the situation. But as the Association of Broadcasters, I mean, what's your view around accountability and punitive measures?
I think it's important to remember that the National Association of Broadcasters, the NAB, are a separate entity to the BCCSA. The BCCSA are completely independent to us. We established them, and then we sort of pushed them out and said, go do your thing. And for the most part, their decisions have been, I think, fair. I think they've been appropriate, and they have been done in a manner which ensures that while members of the public are receiving some sort of obligation for whatever has been said on air, it's not putting a damper on what can be said by broadcasters. And I think that's a very important distinction. So yes, there are retractions, there's apologies, there's sometimes punitive measures, but I think it's very important to have a balancing act. We don't ever want a situation where broadcasters think, and especially radio personalities think, I actually don't want to touch this topic at all, because I know the BCCSA are going to give me such a big clap that, this isn't going to be something. So we want to ensure that people are mindful of the boundaries while still allowing, open dialogue and engagement on important issues. So I think that's the line.
Yeah. I also want to talk about the new online code of conduct, because it's a major issue, but I'll take some questions. Let's start right at the back there. Mr. Sanyani.
Good morning. I'm Murio Sanyani from Power FM.
Good morning.
Just a point of clarity. We heard from one of the students earlier talking about how podcasters are curating content that is more appealing to us radio people. So in terms of regulation and codes and conduct, because as radio practitioners, we are governed by a whole lot of codes.
100%, yeah.
As journalists, we are also governed by the ethics of journalism and so on, but also beyond that, other codes. Whereas podcasters, I'm not sure if there's anything that governs them, but they've got that absolute freedom, and maybe that's why probably there's migration from radio to podcasters because of that. So the question is, without even to stifle, because we value the freedom. We don't want censorship and so on. But are there any plans to start governing that? And secondly, if podcasters is one point, now let's come to digital radio, because we've got plenty of digital radio. And now radio is radio, but it is digital. But because they're not licensed by ICASA. But the fact that it's radio, and some of the things that we hear on digital radio, as practitioners, we say, how possible is that? Because as radio practitioners, we understand the codes, we understand the ethics, we understand these things. But people, by the mere fact that they're not licensed by ICASA, it's like it gives them carte blanche to do things that you will know that in a typical radio station, that will never happen. So how do we deal with that? Thank you.
All right. Anybody else before we get a response? Leratu.
My name is Mpora Pata from EWN. I just want to perhaps it's a question to both the Wits Journalism School, one, but also to Julia, in that we talk about how newsrooms get into trouble with the likes of the NAB and the BCCSA. And we know the busy of the newsroom. So my question is, what do we do? Because our newsrooms are so young, how do we make sure that someone who is coming straight from varsity, who walks into a newsroom, goes to a story, picks up a complaint, firstly, be able to acclimatize that person with the rules? Because the reality of the situation is that a 20-year-old reporter hasn't had the time to be taught and be conscientized about these rules and these limitations to how our spectrum works. So perhaps a question about suggesting how we navigate the teachings in the everyday busy of the newsroom. Because as a news editor, all I want is somebody to hit the ground running and go out on a story and give me the story. So, I mean, when I was at Newsroom last year, we had an incident of journalists who chased down a witness at the Senzo Meyiwa trial, and that was a hell of a thing. But the truth of it is, any reporter would have done that because that's what we want. So how do we navigate the day-to-day vis-a-vis having to teach and support young reporters? Because Thabiso and I are 25 years, 30 years in the radio industry. And so the up and coming, what do we do with them so that the rules that we're talking about are part of their day-to-day as much as the conveyor belt that is the newsroom and the churning out of the content that we're talking about? Thank you.
Thank you, Mpo. We need a microphone.
Yeah, I think we need a microphone at the front. Just from the perspective of the NAB and the BCCSA, and then I'll hand over to you. I think it's a conversation we've actually had with the Press Council. There's a lot of concern about this sort of thing happening in newsrooms, the lack of training for new journalists entering the sector. And there's definitely a need for someone like the Press Council to do a roadshow, to do information sessions, to engage with universities, that sort of thing, to ensure that when these new journalists enter the workforce, they at least have a basic understanding, and in a practical sense, not just a theoretical sense. And I think that's really, really helpful. But I don't know if you have more on that.
Before you respond, maybe let's go to Morio's point, because it fits into what we are trying to also decode, code of conduct.
Sure, it's two really, really excellent questions.
My understanding about his question is that we as practitioners in the mainstream, we are expected to abide by the rules, right, and conduct ourselves in a certain manner. But on the other hand, you have young people who are new entrants who do as they please, and yet we are fighting for the same attention in terms of the people that listen to us. Am I summarizing it correctly, Mr. Why is that? I mean, how do you then create a balance to say the rules must apply to everybody? Because one of his examples is that whether it's online radio or mainstream radio, it is still radio.
I think this is an excellent question, and this is a key concern for the NAB and for broadcasters. We have seen this massive issue where there's no regulatory parity. So you have your regulated broadcasters with their CASA licenses who have strict rules, who have strict terms in terms of their licenses that they have to adhere to. They have to follow the broadcasting sector code. They have to follow the BCCSA sector code if they're an NAB member and they're signatory to the BCCSA. And there are other implications. There's the taxation, there's the local content requirements, there are all these things that the broadcasters sitting in this room understand and know and deal with every single day. And then on the other hand, you have your new online platforms, your podcasts, who, can just spring up, just get a microphone. Anyone can be a podcaster these days. You have your online radio stations. It's a relatively easy thing to set up. So this is a massive, massive concern for the NAB and its members. We made submissions last year on the draft white paper on audio and audio-visual content services. And a lot of our focus in that was ensuring that there is regulatory parity. I mean, there are a lot of intentions in terms of this draft white paper, and if you haven't had a chance to read it, it is quite lengthy, but it is very interesting. The idea is to create policies and frameworks which will bring these online content services, these online podcasts and online radio stations into the regulatory framework. It might not be identical to what regulated broadcasters currently have, but there will definitely be some sort of policy that they will have to adhere to. I actually made some great notes on this earlier. I mean, this is a huge concern, and I think this is one of the reasons why the NAB and the BCCSA, the BCCSA created the Online Content Service Code of Conduct. The purpose of the Online Content Service Code of Conduct is to regulate online content services of licensed broadcasters, which is great. So we've got this wonderful code, and I'll go into more detail about that just now, because we saw that there was this gap where the free-to-air content services has a code of conduct, the subscription services has a code of conduct, but broadcasters are more and more moving into the podcasting space. And more moving into the online space. You've got your catch-up, you've got, those sort of, the EVOD, that sort of thing, the video on demand services. And we saw there was this gap, and we realized that we needed to get ahead of the curve and create this online code, which I'll discuss just now in more detail. But as you say, the problem there is, what do we do about the people who aren't regulated broadcasters? And that is a huge issue. There was a study done, I think, by UNICEF South Africa last year, and I think it was actually my colleague wrote a really great piece that's in this. Ofense Mbweni, please have a look at it. It's a really interesting piece. 70% of children have access to the internet without any sort of parental oversight, whereas broadcasters have specific user advisories in place. Certain services like your DSTVs, you can put a child lock on things. All online content has to have some sort of advisory in terms of the age appropriateness of the content. So that's another issue, and that's definitely something we as the NAB are going to push for quite heavily in the next year or two, probably only next year after the election cycle. But that is something that definitely needs to be addressed. That's something that is critical to ensuring that A, regulated broadcasters are treated fairly, and B, that members of the public have some sort of protection, have some sort of safeguards from these online podcasts. I mean, at the same time, the gentleman in the back earlier raised the point about how podcasts are slightly more dynamic, and that's why a lot of broadcasters are now moving into that. And I think I'm not sure who said it. It was such a great comment about how podcasts and broadcasting are basically complementary. So we need to find a way to ensure that broadcasters who are heavily regulated, heavily taxed, who have massive local content requirement, continue to operate in a fair playing field with these online content services.
All right, Dr. Balia.
Thank you for that. Gosh.
I'm very passionate about this.
So thank you so much. So just a couple of points. I was, to the point about juniorization, I hate the word juniorization because I think it is so prejudicial against young people who are trying to do their best with what they have access to. And so I think it's become a very loaded word that we need to unpack over time and make sure we find something else to represent it, because it's not their fault. We wouldn't take a 16-year-old with a learner's license and let them drive a car by themselves. they have to have someone in the seat next to them for at least 2 years before they can drive that car by themselves. And that speaks to mentorship, which is not training. And you who started 25 years ago will remember the people who helped you navigate newsrooms, who helped you navigate issues, who helped you, debate an ethical conundrum and so on and so forth. And that does not exist today because every one of us is stretched, we're busy, we don't have the time. But I will say that if we do have the time and the ability, if we have a moment where we can sit down with someone and debrief, where we can reflect on something, we should be doing it. I continue to do it regardless of my life and schedule because that's a responsibility. And so many of my students are sitting here today who are in the industry who, 10 and 12 years later will still come to me for counsel. And I make that time because I know there are very few people who are available to them. And to the second point about the online code of conduct, what's really crucial about all of this, and I don't see it as us getting into trouble with the NAB or the BCCSA. When we get complaints, and I say this as a former public advocate at the Press Council, when we get complaints, I'm going, yay, somebody's reading. Someone's paying attention. Someone is caring enough to take us on, and as the audience and the producers, that's what we want. We want to be in that engagement. We want to learn from each other. We want to hold each other to a higher standard. And so that kind of, problems that we run into, I'm turning it around and saying, how can we do better? And when it comes to the online production and the podcasting, we have a serious problem around misogyny in particular, around violence against women, which is, a rape culture that's being pervaded through many of these podcasts that are being produced. And it's not just young people who are doing it. It's established broadcasters who've transitioned to a space where they think they can say and do anything. That is a serious problem we need to confront very urgently. And I'm very pleased to hear that the NAB is taking that head on. Part of the issue here is that there's no one solution to this problem. It's a multi-pronged solution. Part of it is media literacy, so making people understand what content is the right content to and I wouldn't say right, but I would say respectful or responsible content to consume. Who it is that we need to be complaining about and raising the alarm over. If there are red flags to an individual or their work, we need to talk about that. There is also the concept of and it's gone out of my head now. So red flags people, producers, making sure that we are capacitating consumers actually to act better. I was going to use the example of these amateur young people who share mental health tips and whatnot on TikTok, right? These guys are not experts. They pick up buzzwords and whatnot. And what the psychology community has done is said to their practitioners who are professionals, bound by professional codes, get out there. Put your names on these things and say, we are the professionals, you can turn to us. So yes, there's all this other noise, but through the noise, there are people who are experts who are capacitated to deliver good and appropriate and responsible content in mental health and wellness spaces.
Yeah. Well,
Thank
guys,
you.
Complaints by their own nature, we are a complaining nation anyway, so we're likely to spend the whole day deliberating on complaints. So I'll take the last two hands on this one. We'll start with Lerato at the back.
I think just in terms of the word that Dr. Bilal doesn't like, which is juniorization, I think in the radio space, there is a problem with people and management, and I'm glad to see the likes of Tony here, with succession planning, right? That needs to happen in a newsroom, right? Whether this is producers, whether this is anchors, whether this is reporters, you find that you throw somebody into a melting pot in a big story, and they've never done it, right? And when stations sit for strategy, whether marketing strategy, whether newsroom direction and strategy, because we know by what we know that the credibility of an organization lies in the newsroom, which is not directly generating financial product, but it's generating quality and credibility. Therefore, it is the core of the business that needs to be supported. There's a lack of succession, even in the academic space, right, where we are teaching and that kind of thing, there's a lack of succession, and that lack of succession, especially in the newsroom, makes every single kind of newsroom that we have, and this is where I'm talking about commercial or the SABC and the public broadcaster, but at community level, the work that we are doing is that people are realizing that there's a huge need to make sure that their news is ground-based, is correct. We did fact-checking workshops with Africa Check when there was like the infodemic with COVID, because there were just like voice notes flooding streams people were sharing. You can't make people forget to do that. They are bound to do that. But it's that whole thing that Dinesh is talking about getting out there. And when you are sitting in your strategy planning, you say, this is the vehicle that gives us our credibility. Therefore, we should resource it, because our credibility lies in what they are able to output. Therefore, we can sell advertising. Therefore, we can get that done.